In Australia, there are some brands that feel like they're always just part of the landscape. They've always been here. And when it comes to a 40-degree summer day, one brand is the landscape: Peter's Ice Cream. For over 118 years, that blue and white logo has been an Australian staple. We grew up with the drumstick and the sound of the Peter's ice cream truck. The company survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and countless recessions. That blue and white logo is a piece of shorthand for the Australian summer. It's the sound of a plastic spoon scraping the bottom of a sundae cup. It's the rip of the wrapper on a drumstick at the beach. It's the jingle of the ice cream truck echoing down a suburban street. It's an icon, a piece of our shared memory. But its story is one of the most surprising, complex, and secretive in Australian corporate history. Because the brand you think of as Aussie isn't. Not even close. This story is a multi-decade corporate saga of hostile takeovers, Swiss Goliaths, and faceless private equity firms. It's the story of a brand that became so beloved, its feeling became more valuable than its factories. So how did one American immigrant's dream, started in 2 leased rooms, become a billion-dollar asset traded by some of the most powerful financial players on Earth? This is the untold story of Peter's. To understand the Peter's empire, you have to go back to the beginning, and the beginning wasn't in Australia. It was in Michigan, USA, with a man named Frederick Augustus Bolles Peters. Fred Peters was an experienced salesman and sales manager. He first came to Sydney in the 1890s on a business trip trying to save a failing New York bicycle export firm that he had a stake in. That business failed and he went back to America, but his father gave him a piece of advice that would change Australian history. Son, the place to find your money is where you lost it. So, in 1899, Peters came back to Sydney. He started a new business, running several agencies and even manufactured a medicinal product called Peter's Pile Cure. But his real aha moment came from a simple craving. He was homesick and he desperately missed the ice cream that was common back in the States. In Australia, it was almost impossible to get. He saw a massive unsolved problem. In a sweltering country like Australia, ice cream was a rare, expensive luxury for the rich. Think about it from a business perspective. Ice cream in 1900 was a product with a built-in death clock. It was a logistical nightmare. You were selling a product that would literally self-destruct from heat and humidity within minutes. This single fact kept the entire industry tiny. It was a novelty, a rich man's party trick confined to high-end parlors in wealthy city neighborhoods. In 1907, he decided to fix that. He leased 2 rooms inside an ice factory in Paddington and set up Peter's American Delicacy Co. Limited. This single move avoided a production problem as he didn't need to fight with the icemen, the critical delivery drivers who hauled and sold expensive, sawdust-covered blocks of ice from horse-drawn carts. These men were the gatekeepers of cold, and every other business in the city that needed their product was hostage to their prices and delivery schedules. By co-locating inside the ice factory, Peters cut out this unreliable and costly middleman entirely, giving him direct, cheap, and unlimited access to all the ice and freezing power he could ever want. But mass production was useless if the product melted. So how do you sell all this ice cream to a city with no household freezers? Before Peters, the model was static. You owned a parlor and customers had to come to you. This put a tiny geographic leash on every sale. Anyone who lived more than a few blocks away couldn't get their treat home before it turned into a milky soup. Fred Peters' solution was the small refrigerated cabinet. If the customer can't come to the freezer, you put a freezer where the customers already are. He hired out these small refrigerated cabinets to retailers all over the city, to corner shops, fruit shops, and confectioners. He solved their problem and in doing so, guaranteed his product an exclusive frozen foothold on every street corner. He was creating impulse buys in places no one had ever been able to sell ice cream before. The business flourished. It grew so fast that by 1923, 16 years after he leased those first 2 rooms, he was opening a massive, new, state-of-the-art factory in Redfern. And this was when he armed his company with its final legendary weapon. The factory was built to manufacture the product he now famously branded as the health food of a nation. But Redfern was just the new home base. Peters was relentless and had his eyes on the entire continent. In 1927, he expanded north, setting up Peters Arctic Delicacy Co. Limited in Brisbane and opened a branch at Newcastle. Then came 1929. In a single astonishing year, he established associated companies in Victoria, which would eventually become the brand's headquarters, as well as Western Australia and Townsville. To fund this massive growth, Peters took his companies public, and the public's reaction was unlike anything Australia had ever seen. When he launched the Victorian company, the share sale smashed Australian records. The sale was oversubscribed 15 times over, meaning for every one share he offered, people were fighting to buy 15. In the middle of the Great Depression, Fred Peters had turned ice cream into one of the hottest and most trusted investments in the country. By the time Fred Peters himself passed away in 1937, he left behind a dominant national institution. But his true legacy was the system he left behind. A network of massive, efficient factories and a continent-spanning logistics chain. Most importantly, he left behind that business-to-business network of thousands of refrigerated cabinets sitting in shops in almost every town and suburb. So, when Australia recovered from World War II and entered the prosperous boom of the 1950s and 60s, the company he built was perfectly positioned to become the official taste of this new golden age. This is when Peters became the silent, essential engine of the milk bar. That entire post-war scene, the checkerboard floor, the kids spinning on red vinyl stools, the bright neon signs, that whole world ran on Peters. As a business, Peters was the partner that made the milk bar possible. Its reliable, mass-produced tins of vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry were the essential ingredients that allowed milk bars to serve up thousands of milkshakes, spiders, and sundaes with perfect consistency. The company, now a national giant, continued to innovate, inventing the very memories we associate with summer. In 1963, they brought the drumstick to Australia, a revolutionary cone you could eat with one hand, perfectly suited for the booming beach culture. And throughout it all, there was the Eskimo pie and the iconic ice cream brick. That classic block of ice cream goodness that your mum would buy from the truck and slice up with a hot knife on Sunday night. By the 1970s, the company Fred Peters had built had woven itself into the fabric of daily life for 2 generations. It was a piece of the national identity, seemingly as Australian as Vegemite or kangaroos. And that powerful, beloved, and now founderless company was about to become a target. While most Australians were at the beach eating drumsticks, the 1980s arrived. This was the era of corporate raiders, junk bonds, and hostile takeovers. The goal was to raid companies, buy stable, historic brands with borrowed money, break them apart, sell off the valuable bits, and use the cash to move on to the next victim. And Peters, now a cash-rich but founderless institution, looked like a very attractive, very undervalued asset. The Aussie icon, the brand of our childhoods, was about to be passed around like a corporate hot potato. At first, it was snapped up by the infamous Adelaide Steamship Company, or AdSteam. By the 1980s, AdSteam had been transformed into one of Australia's most feared corporate raiders, run by the notorious John Spalvins. He launched hostile takeovers and built a sprawling, complex empire that, at its peak, controlled department stores like David Jones, supermarkets like Woolies, and food giants like Peters. To Spalvins, a beloved brand like Peters was a cash cow. Its reliable daily profits were siphoned off to pay the interest on the massive debts he'd racked up buying his next target. For a few years, Spalvins looked like an invincible genius, but the entire empire was built on a mountain of unsustainable, high-interest debt. By the early 1990s, interest rates skyrocketed, the economy hit a recession, and the AdSteam empire came crashing down. It was one of the biggest, most spectacular corporate collapses in the nation's history, leaving a crater in the Australian economy with debts estimated in the billions. To pay off the angry banks, the entire company was carved up and sold for parts, and Peter's Ice Cream was sold off yet again. This time, the buyer was Pacific Dunlop. The company famous for car tires, batteries, and rubber gloves now owned Peter's Ice Cream. This was a direct result of the AdSteam collapse. In the resulting fire sale, Pacific Dunlop was one of the few players left with the cash to make the purchase. Their interest was twofold. First, Pacific Dunlop's board saw Peters as a defensive asset. People stop buying tires in a recession, but they always buy food. Second, they assumed their expertise was transferable. They were masters of manufacturing and logistics for car parts. How different could ice cream be? Well, suffice to say, it was a terrible fit. Pacific Dunlop was a heavy industry company. Their entire business was built on long-term contracts and industrial clients. They suddenly found themselves in the fast-moving, high-turnover, seasonal world of consumer goods. Their clients went from car part retailers to the cutthroat supermarket giants of Coles and Woolies who fought over every single cent. They were a fish out of water, and after just a few short, confusing years, they wanted out. They put the brand up for sale. And in 1995, they found a buyer who was very, very interested. In 1995, Pacific Dunlop sold its entire food division, including Peters, for a reported $550 million to the Swiss multinational Goliath, Nestle. This was the precise moment that Peter's Ice Cream officially stopped being an Australian-owned company. It was now owned and operated by one of the largest and most controversial food corporations on Earth. If you've watched our previous videos, we've talked a lot about the controversies associated with the Nestle brand. The mere connection of a product to Nestle would conjure up a lot of uncomfortable questions. But the perception of Nestle back then isn't what it is today. There was very little public fuss about this takeover, and that's probably because the deal made complete sense. The fact that Pacific Dunlop owned an ice cream brand like Peters would raise a couple of eyebrows. What's this tire company doing in the ice cream business? But Nestle was the perfect buyer. They were already one of the biggest food companies on Earth. They already had one of the world's most powerful distribution networks. They already had a frozen food division. For Nestle, they could slot the Peters brand right into their existing hyper-efficient system, instantly boosting its value. The Peters factories and its valuable fleet of freezer trucks were immediately plugged into Nestle's own massive existing food division, creating enormous efficiencies and cost savings. Furthermore, Nestle brought its immense negotiating power to the table, using its scale to secure better deals for Peters alongside Nestle's other frozen offerings in domestic markets. For over 15 years, Peters operated as a stable, quiet, and profitable division of the Nestle empire. But by 2012, Nestle's global strategy had changed. They were under pressure from shareholders to become leaner and decided to start getting out of asset-heavy businesses like ice cream. In 2012, Nestle sold Peters to the Australian private equity firm Pacific Equity Partners, or PEP. PEP bought the company, restructured it, cut costs, and optimized it for a quick sale. And that's exactly what they did. After just 2 years of ownership, PEP sold Peters again in 2014. The new buyer was a major European ice cream manufacturer called R&R Ice Cream. Just 2 years after they bought Peters, R&R Ice Cream itself became the centerpiece of a new mega deal. It turns out, R&R was owned by another, even bigger private equity firm, the Paris-based PAI Partners. At the same time, Nestle was still trying to sell off its other global ice cream businesses. So, in 2016, PAI Partners and Nestle struck one of the biggest deals in food history. They decided to merge R&R Ice Cream, the company that now owned Peters, with Nestle's entire European ice cream division. Together, they created a new joint venture, a new global ice cream Goliath, a company you've probably never ever heard of, Froneri. This is the company that owns Peters today. This single entity not only owns the entire Peters range, but also Häagen-Dazs. They hold the license for all Cadbury and Oreo ice creams. They own the premium brand Nui and even New Zealand's national icon, Tip Top. Peters is just now one asset in this massive, invisible global empire, a financial instrument on a spreadsheet. So, where does that leave the brand today? For now, it's still a king of the Australian market. Its distribution network, that system of trucks and freezers Fred Peters pioneered, is its greatest weapon. It's in every servo, every supermarket, and every milk bar. That ubiquity is priceless. But it's now fighting a war on two new fronts, a war that its original design was never meant to handle. First, it's fighting new competition. The rise of boutique, premium brands like Gelato Messina has fundamentally re-educated the Australian palate. We don't just want chocolate anymore. We want salted caramel and white chocolate. We want artisanal, small batch, innovative, Instagrammable flavors. Vanilla just isn't enough these days. Second, it's finding its own business model. It has to serve two masters, its owners, Freneri, and the modern consumer. Its owners demand efficiency, volume, and profit. They need Peters to keep churning out the high-volume heritage products like the drumstick in order to turn a decent profit. The modern consumer, however, challenges the brand to innovate, to release new flavors, create new options, explore more partnerships, and do its part to stay competitive in a market filled with brands that are growing at breakneck pace. That's a very difficult and very expensive balancing act. It has to be a nostalgic, reliable, and cheap brand, but it also has to be premium, innovative, and exciting. The story of Peters Ice Cream is one of the most incredible in Australian business. It's a story that starts with one American immigrant who, craving ice cream from home, was smart enough to lease 2 rooms in an ice factory. It's a story of a business built not on a bicycle fleet, but on a revolutionary system of refrigerated cabinets. And it's a story of modern global capitalism, of how that beloved brand, that piece of our national memory, was quietly sold and sold again until it became a financial asset in a vast, invisible, international portfolio. So here's the big question. Does it matter? Does it matter who owns an icon as long as the ice cream is still made in its Australian factories using Australian milk and it still tastes like the summers you remember? Or is there a point where a brand's story is just that, a story? Let us know what you think in the comments section below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the business history of a brand you thought you knew, do us a solid and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell. We've got a lot more deep dives coming your way. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and as always, stay curious.